All right, folks, let's get into power. Power is one of those interesting things. It seems like one of those things that you would love to have, but the more and more I've learned about power, the more and more I realize I would rather have influence than power any day of the week. Because power also means that you're responsible for some stuff, and I don't know if I want to be responsible for everything. All right, so looking at power. Power is our ability to influence or control people and or events. That's why we're going to be careful with power because it's super seductive. Like the idea that we can be in control of everything and tell everybody what it is and what to do. It's something that really seems pretty attractive until you realize when you have power, people don't tell you much about what they're thinking and feeling. And people will kind of check out or ghost on you because of that power problem. Defining characteristics. Power is always present. So it is there in symmetrical relationships. There is some power that is there when you're looking at people that are peers or coworkers. There is power present in complementary relationships. So with this one, we're looking at the power with folks that may be working like different departments or in different areas, but they both like work towards the same like means or the same goals, but one kind of has power over the other. So it's like if you looked at like advertising has a little bit more power over folks than does manufacturing, right? Because advertising will help get a sense of how many people want to buy the thing that manufacturing makes. So in some ways they have a little bit of like leeway over each other. In manufacturing, they might have power over marketing in that they only can make so much stuff. So you see, it's not always direct. It's sometimes indirect power. And when we're looking at didactic power theory, people with moderate power are the most likely to use some form of controlling communication. So mid-level managers are folks that are going to be trying to use controlling power the most. And I think this is because of that thing that I talked about earlier when we're looking at the idea of like it seems really attractive. It seems like something you'd want to do, but it's also kind of problematic as well when we're really looking at what does it mean to use one's power over someone, and how many people use power in a good way? How many people use power in a bad way? I think we see bad power examples much, much more often than we see good power examples. So power defining characteristics. Power can either be used ethically or unethically. You can use it either way. And power is granted, and we give away our power quite a bit. I loved the video for this speech right here so much that I am embedding it as another video to watch right after you watch my video. I loved it. It's only about 2 minutes long, but check it out. It is fantastic. And then power also influences our conflicts. Conflict theorists see the education system as a means in which those in power stay in power. Generally speaking, if you got power, you're going to use your power to stay in power, to lord your power over other people. This is also why power is so problematic, especially if you want to be like a justice-minded person or an equity-minded person that is really trying to like have the best relationships with people out there. Having power is complicated, especially if you want to have good relationships with others. So there's a couple different forms of power currencies. Power currency is a resource that others value, right? And so we all have these different power currencies, and other people have different power currencies over us. So resource currency is like I think you might be able to see resource currency and who has toilet paper and who doesn't, right? Or who has more money and who doesn't, or who has access to an opportunity, or well, no, that's a different example, but like who has more stuff and who has access to stuff. So for example, you might have more resource currency if you have more toilet paper right now, and other people don't have the toilet paper, right? So you have that resource currency. Your boss has resource currency, and that you work for your boss and they have access to your hours and your paycheck and all of those things. And so of course, resource currency becomes an example there. There's expertise currency. I have communication expertise currency, generally speaking, over you in class. So when you might ask me about like advice or relationship problems or relationship questions, you would come to me because I have an expertise currency. You become very aware of how expertise currency works and how powerful a plumber can be when you have a toilet leak. Right? When it's time to call them at like 2 o'clock in the morning and you're like, man, that's so much money. Then you realize the plumber's got the power, right? Social network currency is when people have access to different social networks that you may want to be joining. So someone may have social network currency over you, or you may have a social network currency over your friends. An easy way to see how this works is with little brothers and sisters. They always want to hang out with you and your friends and do what your friends are doing. That's a very easy to understand example of social network currency. Then there's personal currency. This is access to you personally, or your willingness to be a friend to someone or to help somebody else. This is one of those things that you can just freely choose to give away, or you can choose to hoard and keep to yourself. The more I think you tend to give these things away, the more you tend to be other-minded and are willing to help other folks. I think the better person you are and the happier you end up being. And then intimacy currency. This is the currency that we have and share with our romantic partners, right? So sometimes people withdraw forms of like physical intimacy if they're upset in a relationship, which is a very problematic thing to do because you're not usually probably dealing with the problems. You have an underlying conflict that's not being addressed, and you withdraw the emotional currency, you withdraw the physical intimacy until you get your things met. But that's kind of like hijacking your relationship. And I don't recommend withholding intimacy currency. Instead, just practice the conflict stuff that I'm going to teach you in the upcoming things. I'm also a big fan of this video right here. Being kind is all about power currencies. I would definitely recommend watching that. I think the more kind you are, the more you tend to share your power with other people, the more that you help people with the power that you have. I think the more power you get in return through the related power of other people and their social networks, their expertise, their personal currencies, and their resource currencies. The problem is people tend to think of power as just a resource, so they hoard all their power to themselves. And rather than just, here's some power that I can help you with, here's some power I can help you with, here's some power I can help you with. When you start giving all this stuff away, people are more apt to give it back to you. And then we got this power circulating around in ways that helps not just you, but it helps me and potentially starts helping other people. Because the more we give and share with others, the more likely we are to give and share with others. And then the more's out there. Right? That is the difference between scarcity and abundance thinking. When you think there's not enough, you're right because you hoard and you like protect and you be afraid. But when you share and you're willing to share and give to other people, people are more willing to share with others. There's a thing called oxytocin that is actually released when someone's nice or sweet or kind to us. We get an oxytocin boost in our brain, and then we're more likely to share and give and make a difference for others. I love like the cool part of human beings, like the in-group out-group part of human beings scares me a little bit. But this oxytocin compassionate hormone thing, man, I love that. I think that is so amazing. Power and gender are very, very intertwined. Generally speaking, men are overvalued with their ability to access, use, lord over, have power than women are in most societies across the world. There are some matriarchal societies where women have more power than men. For example, I believe Navajo culture is an example of matriarchal society. But again, most women still dramatically lack a lot of economic power as well as political power when compared to men. And I think you can even see this stuff in the first draft of the stimulus bill that they were trying to enact, given that everybody's like losing their jobs and stuff right now, and that they were thinking about not giving any money to anybody that didn't work for the year of 2018 or 2019. That's not fair, right? Because like stay-at-home mothers need access to these resources to help their children, right? Because we think of working or care work as not real work, it disfavors women. And you see how like men tend to be more favored because they tend to not be care workers as much as women are. That's how like that whole like idea of power and gender gets so intertwined in such problematic ways, because caring for somebody is work and it should be recognized as work, and we should value and reward that as work as well. Power and culture. People are granted power according to which power currencies they possessed and how much those power currencies are valued in their culture. So again, when we look at like culture and what type of power culture or power currencies people have, it's funny, like in the United States, there's a huge amount of power currency in being famous or being celebrity, right? If you have celebrity, it's funny because people will let you eat at their restaurant for free, even though if you're a celebrity, you probably have plenty of money and you can afford to eat at that restaurant no matter what. Like, you would think the person that needs to eat at that restaurant for free would be someone going through a rough time or someone that lost their job, right? But because we overvalue celebrity culture or fame culture in America, that's example of U.S. culture overvaluing this idea and then giving more power to something else, right? So, for example, another example of power and culture in royals, like the royal family in the UK. They have access to a ton of power because there's just divert power given to royals in the United Kingdom because they've decided that they want to have this family that is like their unofficial mascot. And I don't get or understand it much, but like, people from Britain love the idea. They're a big fan of this idea. I mean, there's things we do weird here. There's things that other people that are weird there. And I shouldn't say weird. I should more so just say different, right? It's just different. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. Although the overvaluing of those things, I think, are problematic in my personal opinion. All right, let's look at kinds of power. So, there is visible power, there is hidden power, and then there is invisible power. So I'm going to kind of try to go through these. I'm going to read them to you, which is kind of seems stupid to me. But as I read them, usually it sparks some ideation where I can tell you more about these things and kind of how this stuff works. So bear with me. Key terms for building stronger working knowledge of power. Who has power and who is powerless. So power over is where one person or a group of people dominates or controls other. This is also viewed in negative terms, with power seen as a limited resource, right? So generally speaking, adults are seen to have power over all children, no matter what is going on. Pretty much any adult can be like, hey, you cut that out. Now, it changes if parents are like, you don't tell my kid what to do, right? But if the kid's about to run into the street and somebody just grabs your kid and pulls them out because they were going to hit by a car, generally speaking, adults have that power over children and tend to chide or correct them in those ways. Power, too, is characterized as the ability to act, the idea of the capableness of one to make a difference for someone else. So it's the power to do something, the power to influence something, the power to change something, the power to say yes to something, the power to say no to something, power to create or shape or make an action. I hope that makes sense. Power with is the ability to bring somebody else together with you to make some form of collective action together, right? So power with is our ability to team up and enact change or make a difference, right? So power with is, again, one of those things that's not really used in America, sadly. I gotta watch my nonverbals because I forgot I have a video up. Power with is our ability to make a collective action together. Like, for example, like so many laws, we could just decide we don't want to like observe those laws. If everybody just observed it, just everybody said, no, we're not going to do that. For example, though I don't advocate it because I feel like taxes are a way to help create collective good. If everybody at the same time decided we aren't going to pay income tax anymore, there's nothing anybody could do to stop us because everybody can't go to jail at the same time, right? So our collective power to make a unbelievable difference, is huge, but we really don't see or notice those things because sometimes that power is a little bit invisible to us. And then power within is our individual, our collective worth and dignity that are forms of power. So the person that you are, the way you treat people, the best way I can think of this is an idea that's called moral authority. And so if you're a good person that generally helps other people or looks out for somebody else, people will listen to you and listen to what you have to say because you've shown yourself to be a good, kind, other-focused, ethical person, right? And because you tend to do things the right way, because people tend to trust the things you have to say, because you have shown yourself to be a trustworthy person, you tend to have a lot of power within because of your sense of true self-worth. You know who you are. You have a calm and confident sense of who you are and the power that is within you, as well as a sense of dignity, or you give dignity to others. And this is a form of power too. But again, we're not used to seeing this power within notion. Who would be a great example? A good example of somebody that has a lot of power within them would be the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama is a really cool, very nice, sweethearted dude. Doesn't have a lot of power. I mean, Tibetan Buddhists will listen to what he has to say, but other people who are not Buddhists will listen to what he has to say because he has a sense of self-worth and dignity, and he gives self-worth and dignity to others. And so people listen to him because of those things. Last little part, again, sorry for the word vomit. Oh, wait. I got to talk about visible power. Visible power are contests over interests which are visible in public spaces or formal decision-making bodies. Now, usually when we're talking about these things, we're talking like legislature, we're talking about government bodies, local assemblies, or consultative forums. However, they also apply to decision-making arenas of organizations or even social movements or other spaces that have formed a place of collective action. So if you think about protests, or you think about Martin Luther King and everything he did for civil rights, that is a great example of somebody making that power with, as well as that power within notion, much more visible because everybody decided to make a difference. And so a great example of what that looked like is when they used to say, Black people can't sit at these lunch counters. They would just go sit at these lunch counters, and then there was tons and tons of people that would do this. And when these tons and tons of people would do this thing, they would sit at the lunch counter and they're like, okay, well, we're going to take you to jail. And then there was a whole nother group of people that were like, okay, well, we're going to sit here now. And they're like, okay, let's take you to jail. And eventually there were so many people that they couldn't put them in jail anymore because the jail was full, right? And it was funny because the protesters would be like, hey, take me to jail, just to show them that the power over them was actually limited, right? And because they were doing things in a nonviolent way, they acknowledged the self-worth of the police officers. They acknowledged the dignity of people and systems, but they also demanded dignity, and they demanded a recognition of their own self-worth. So examples of what this looks like in life is voting in elections for appointing a new intergalactic ruler, public social justice planning to choose the color for the poster for the 3rd annual burger cookie cook-off could be an example of how you use this form of visible power. Other forms of power. There is hidden power. Hidden forms of power are used by vested interests to maintain their power and privilege by creating barriers of participation, excluding key areas from the public arena, or by controlling politics backstage. So this might occur within political processes, but also in organization and other group contexts as well, such as workplaces, NGOs, or community-based organizations. Examples. 2 political parties deciding that the Clinton and Clintag are 2 candidates for intergalactic leader deciding, and they go before the legislator and they decide who will vote. I am not going to read those things. I'm going to give you other examples of hidden forms of power. So examples of hidden forms of power would be who gets to vote and who doesn't. right? So, for example, there's people in the United States that are United States citizens, and all United States citizens have the ability to vote. However, there's people that live within the United States that are not citizens that still pay their taxes, that still observe all the laws and regulations. They still obey all the laws. They do everything that they're supposed to do. They pay into Social Security even though they don't get Social Security, and they don't have the ability to have a vote. Right? This is a form of hidden power against folks that are from other countries, or folks that are here on work visas, that don't give them the ability to have a say in what happens here in America. And it's a form of hidden power used against them to minimize their voices so they don't have an equal say. All right, lastly, invisible power. While it may be less visible, hidden power still assumes that people are aware of and able to articulate their grievances. This can be investigated by looking outside the formal and public arenas of decision making and searching for the voices who are of discontent who are excluded from the public view. However, invisible power goes a step further, and it involves the way in which awareness of one's rights and interests are hidden through the adoption of dominating ideologies, values, and other forms of behavior by relatively powerless groups themselves. Sometimes this is also referred to as the internalization of powerlessness. Right? And so examples of what this might look like are the belief that there are no alternative outside of Democrats or Republicans, right? In this country, we act like there's only two choices. However, if we all decided we want a third choice and everybody was super on board for a third choice and you just voted for that third choice, boom, that third choice person would be the leader, right? Another example is the beliefs that successful organizing will strengthen our community bonds and help us build our own collective power. For example, another thing that we don't understand our invisible power to affect. We think that police are the reason why there is no crime. And though police do come to enforce laws, they're really not the ones that stop the crime from happening. The people that make sure crime doesn't happen at a crazy bananas exponential rate is that we just choose not to do crime most of the time. The fact that most of the time we choose to follow the laws is the invisible power of us following the laws that makes it have the power. But again, if there was a law and we just decided to stop observing it, then there would be nothing that anybody could do to stop the collective us, right? So, for example, like borders are just imaginary lines that exist in people's heads. If we just stopped observing borders or stopped acting like a border made a difference, those borders would cease to exist because we stop giving invisible power to this thing because we act like that border doesn't necessarily matter. Another thing that we might choose to do that would be an example of how we can make our invisible power more seen or more known is if we just started collectively more taking care of the people in our neighborhoods. This form of community action would make sure that our neighbors don't get evicted, that everybody in your neighborhood has plenty of food, just by choosing to organize for collective good in our area. Again, this is invisible power, and invisible power is really hard to see and recognize because we've been trained and conditioned not to recognize it. Another example of how we could use our invisible power is if men would collectively stand up for women when they're harassed, when they're in situations where they're getting paid less. Like, for example, if I had a woman, if I have a colleague that's getting paid less and I choose to use my male power to walk in and be like, hey, this person's getting paid less. I want you to pay me less because I do the same job as them and I think what you're doing is wrong, right? Now, if I do that alone, maybe they just choose to pay me less. But what if I talk to all the rest of the men and all the rest of the men come in and say the same thing? Now, again, you might think that they would just be like, well, then they'll just pay you less. However, what we're making them more aware of is our invisible power. And we could just say, well, we're going to use our invisible power not to come to work today until you choose to pay the women the appropriate amount. right? Again, this form of collective action, this form of invisible power becoming visible and being seen as more visible is a way of us using our power on behalf of other people to hopefully move towards a collective good beyond ourselves. But that's where too, right? Power and influence, it becomes really complicated when we really look at like breaking it down and seeing how that stuff works. So understand, there's a lot of different forms of power out there. What we're most used to seeing is visible power, but we are not so aware of hidden power and what it does to change our lives or shape us into the way that we're supposed to be, right? Part of the reason why we dress the way we do is because the hidden power of media telling us to look or act a certain way. Our invisible power is hidden to us because we don't realize that we could just choose to do things differently. We can choose to value things in different ways. We can choose not to be so like controlled by our stupid phones all the time. We could choose to look up and help the people around us a little bit more. Like, what would the world look like if we chose to use power in different ways? That's what I like thinking about. So today, what I talked to you about was the different forms of power. I talked to you about different forms of power currency. I talked to you about defining characteristics of power. I talked to you about different ways it can manifest, different power currencies, power in gender, power in culture, as well as kinds of power, hidden, invisible, and visible power, and what we could choose to do differently if we choose to take our opportunity to change what we think about power and how power works.